Here's a quick concise recap of the Spanish and the Aztecs. Remember, this unit is actually called Worldviews in Conflict. This overview will quickly go over the Aztec worldview, the Spanish worldview, and how violent conflict became inevitable. The Aztecs were not the only pre-Columbian group inhabiting what is now called Mexico. Depending on where you sit on the Mayans, they may not even be the most famous. The Aztecs wind up being important in regard to world history because they were the preeminent power in the region's most populous and important region at the arrival of the European powers in 1519. It wasn't always that way. Around 400 years earlier, legend states that the Aztecs lived in a region called Aztlan, hundreds of miles to the north. According to lore, the god Huitzilopochtli commands them to go and find a new home, one that has an eagle resting upon a prickly pear cactus with a snake in its claws. It's more likely that neighboring peoples forced them out of their ancestral home and they became nomadic in the search for food and necessary resources to sustain life. The Aztecs will eventually found their city around 1325, 200 years before the arrival of the Spanish, on the island in the middle of the lake Texcoco, a region that nobody else wanted. They called that city Tenochtitlan. From here, they began as mercenaries fighting on behalf of more powerful tribes as they continually adapted their land and became more and more powerful. Eventually, they would gain dominion over all of the other people in the surrounding regions. The Aztecs adapted to their surroundings by improving their food production through the building of chinampas, floating islands made from thatch and dredged up soil from the lake bottom, which helped the Aztecs have continual harvests throughout the year. They also built aqueducts to carry fresh water into the town, and causeways to help bring food and resources from outside, but which could also be torn down at a moment's notice in case of invasion. Religion was very important to the Aztecs, and everything that they did was to win the favor of a pantheon of gods. By far the most well-known of these rituals is that of human sacrifice. This was done on a large scale, and as many as 25,000 people in a year could be sacrificed, as human blood was considered the most sacred offering that could be given to the gods. The most important for this polytheistic empire were the big four: Huitzilopochtli, Quetzalcoatl, Tlaloc, and Tezcatlipoca. Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, was the patron god of all the Aztecs, and the one towards whom they gave their greatest reverence. Quetzalcoatl, named for the beautiful Quetzal bird of Mexico, was the god of the wind. He will come into prominence in 1519, when Moctezuma, emperor of the Aztecs, will believe that conquistador Hernan Cortez may actually be Quetzalcoatl. Tlaloc is the god of the rain. It is to him that sacrifices of young children are given in times of drought or when the Aztecs are in need of a good harvest. Tezcatlipoca is the most powerful of all the gods, the god of the night sky. The Aztecs need to feed Huitzilopochtli so that he may continue his endless battle against Tezcatlipoca to bring the sun. The Aztecs began their history as mercenaries and were warlike for the remainder of their history. They fought wars for two reasons. Number one, to gain resources. They would do this by fighting and taking food and slaves for their growing empire, or by demanding tribute, which means that the neighboring tribes would pay them in large amounts of resources and human life so that the Aztecs would not attack. The second reason for war was by engaging in what was referred to as the Flower Wars. These are wars whose sole purpose is to capture slaves that could be used for human sacrifice at the Aztecs' great temples. The weapon of choice for the Aztecs was the macuitl, a hardwood paddle with sharpened obsidian stone embedded into its sides. This would wound their enemy without killing them. The stresses put on the neighboring tribes will come back to bite the Aztecs, as these tribes will eventually join with the invading Spaniards in an effort to defeat their hated enemies. The Aztecs were an imperial empire centered in Tenochtitlan, a city said to be more populous than any in Europe. Millions were under Aztec control by the beginning of the 16th century, but within 2 years, all of that would be gone. Now that we've seen the worldview of the Aztecs, what about the worldview of the Spanish would lead these two great empires into conflict? The story of the worldview of Spain dates back to the year 711. At that time, Spain was a predominantly Christian country that had been weakened by internal struggle. In that year, a group of North African people called the Moors sailed across from Morocco and invaded the country, quickly taking it over. It it would be more than 700 years before the Spanish Christian forces would take it back in something called the Reconquista. For generations, all of Spain had been embroiled in bitter warfare based on religion, ethnicity, and culture. In the year 1492, 7 years after the birth of Cortes, and the same year that Columbus reaches the New World, forces under the dynastic union of Ferdinand and Isabella defeat the Muslims and unite Spain as a Catholic country. A very Catholic country. To avoid ever going into the turmoil of years' worth of civil war again, they eventually force the Muslims, and the Jews while they're at it, to leave Spain or convert. In an effort to root out heresy, Isabella and Ferdinand put Tomás de Torquemada in charge of the Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition forces people to convert or die, and will torture them into confessing their sins. Again, people who are either religiously or ethnically different from the Spanish are dealt with violently. This element of their worldview will cross the ocean with them into the New World. Spain quickly becomes the great European power in the Americas, particularly in Central and South America. By the time Hernán Cortés arrives, they have already gained control of Hispaniola, and he will join the forces that take Cuba as well. Natives are dealt with in the Americas in a similar fashion to how Jews and Muslims were being dealt with in Europe, but as the Spanish had superior weapons and armor, they defeated their rivals here quickly and ruthlessly. In 1519, Hernán Cortés will take a group of 600 conquistadors into Mexico. They learn of human sacrifice and are appalled, and treat the local Mesoamerican groups with hostility as a result. An early battle against the Tabascans brings the Spanish La Malinche, a woman who will become a translator, lover, and confidant to Hernán Cortés. The Spanish march to Tenochtitlan, and native groups join their side, both in fear of the Spanish might and through their own hate of the Aztecs. Aztec Emperor Moctezuma allows Cortés and his men into the city, only to be kidnapped and held against his will. The Spanish will eventually be pushed from Tenochtitlan, and Moctezuma will be killed, but not before the devastating calamity of smallpox takes hold among their people. When Cortés returns with a larger, more powerful force, the Aztecs are in a weakened state. Cortés exacerbates the situation by surrounding Tenochtitlan and putting it under siege. He destroys their aqueducts and makes it impossible to get food into the island city. After several months, in 1521, Cortés and his men ravage the city and destroy all remnants of the Aztec civilization. After the Aztecs are defeated, Cortés and his followers quickly set up a colony and almost immediately begin to grow in all directions. Mexico will become the heart of New Spain. As its governor, Cortés learns that the best way to maintain hold on his empire will be through growing his own population. Conquistadors are commanded to either bring back a woman from Spain or to take a native as their wife in Mexico if they want to have a hacienda, or large ranch or plantation. The rest of the Mesoamerican peoples are then put into slavery in what was called the encomienda system. In this system, royalties are sent to the King of Spain, to the governor Cortés, and fortunes are made by Spanish settlers. The natives are at the bottom of the hierarchy. As children are born, their social rank is dependent upon race, with the Spanish at the top, followed by the mestizos, or children of European and native ancestry, the natives, and at the bottom, slaves from Africa, or mixed-blood children of Africans called mulattoes. Eventually, Mexico will become a mixture of the Aztec and Spanish Catholic traditions, far different from either the Spanish or the Aztecs. As a result, they will eventually revolt against Spain and become an independent nation, Mexico.